You guys, do you see what I'm holding in my hands right now? Do you see this? I'm so excited. Listen, I had no intention of purchasing this palette on release. I love Pat McGrath, and this color story very much spoke to me. So I knew I would probably eventually get my hands on it. But I kind of told myself this was not the moment for me to be buying a $128 eyeshadow palette. So imagine my surprise when my husband hands me a gift bag last night and this comes out of it. I had zero clue. You could have knocked me over with a feather. But this man just knows me so well. And he got the purple one. Oh my goodness. So pretty. When I think he's listening to me, he's not listening to me. When I think he's not listening to me, he is clearly listening. Do you see that? Guys, she's so pretty. I feel like we don't have enough light. I don't know. Do we have enough light here? Is that better? Is that too much? I'm not 100% sure. Oh my gosh, she's so pretty. Now, I have heard a few people say that they think the black packaging features this color story a little bit better, and I have to admit that I agree. I do think these particular colors are better viewed against a black background, but she's so gorgeous, I cannot be bothered. I cannot be bothered to care. There's not nearly as much purple in here as there appears to be in product photos, but Pat McGrath Labs are pretty notorious for the product photos not being super accurate, which is a little frustrating, especially when you're talking about a product that is this expensive. I could talk about this release for a while because it has been really, really interesting watching all of the details about it come out, watching people's reactions to the release. However, I'm dying to get this on my eyes. I will insert my swatches here and then we'll do a look. Okay, what I have been dying to do since I first saw this color story is I want to combine the greens and the purples that we have in this palette. I'm putting purples in air quotes because they're not quite as purple as what I was hoping for when we first saw the color story. I do think that this one in particular, Twilight Lilac, is significantly cooler than most of the other similar shades that I have from Pat across all of the palettes that I have from her. But we'll talk more about that when we do comparison swatches at the end of the video. Because this is the deepest matte that's in this palette, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put that on the outside corner, and then we're going to fade toward those more purple lilac colors on the inside. I haven't seen a lot of people do this. I've seen a lot of people do all purple eye looks. I've seen a lot of people do all green eye looks. I have not seen a whole lot of looks combining the two. So that's what I want to do. Now, it can be a little intimidating to combine complementary colors or colors that are pretty far across from each other on the color wheel. That's because if you overlap them, they can kind of cancel each other out and they can get a little gray and muddy. But I will show you how to avoid that. Okay, so I'm just picking up some of this Nocturnal Bloom, the dark green color there. I've got this little flat brush. This is an O2 mini from Rougher, and I'm just going to start mapping out the shape that I want on the outside corner. The trick is getting them both to match. This has been a really, really interesting release to watch. Just because the responses to this release have been pretty varied, I want to say. And I think that was kind of inevitable. It has been 2 years since Pat McGrath's last Mothership release. And I do think for a lot of her core fans, the release of Sunlit Seduction, her last Mothership, was a little disappointing. I'm taking a little tiny fluffy brush with that same color, and we just start filling in that V. Yeah, I think a lot of her core fans were a little bit disappointed by Sunlit Seduction, although my guess is that Sunlit Seduction was probably much more popular with the casual makeup consumer that Pat McGrath is trying to reach through their presence in Sephora than it really was with the die-hard makeup enthusiasts. The honest truth is that Most people who are buying Pat McGrath's palettes are not buying all of them. They're not collectors. And so they aren't going to have 10 other palettes to compare each shade against. So from a financial perspective, it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense for Pat McGrath to make their creative decisions based wholly on what the smaller segment of their audience is wanting. People have been asking for a really colorful palette for a while, although I just don't think that that's something that's going to sell as well to the more casual makeup consumer, especially in the kind of current beauty climate right now, which has been lingering in to more fun, creative makeup as adornment type of makeup, because that's always how I have primarily enjoyed makeup. Not necessarily to create an optical illusion that I'm more genetically blessed than I am, but to wear something pretty and sparkly on my skin. You know what I'm saying? Makeup as adornment. I kind of think of makeup almost like jewelry. I can put on a pair of sparkly earrings and nobody is going to be like, oh my gosh, her earlobes are just naturally very reflective. No, they're going to notice that I'm wearing a pretty pair of earrings, and I'm okay with that. And I'm also okay with people looking at me and saying, oh my gosh, she's wearing really sparkly, pretty eyeshadow. Being able to see the makeup on my face that's not a problem for me. That's not something that I'm going to inherently dislike. I'm going to go ahead and go into this green here. It's one of the new special shades that's in here. After swatching everything, I do feel like they have made some, these are definitely the special shades that are in this palette. Obviously, they're not the baked shades. And I know a lot of people are very disappointed about that. And I totally get that as well. I do think they have made some effort to distinguish these special shades from their normal metallics. They're definitely a lot sparklier and more reflective than their metallics generally are, but they're not the same. It's just not the same experience putting them on the eyes. It's not the same effect, but I do think some effort has been made to kind of replicate the experience of the Baked Bliss Astrals without actually having them in the palette. I don't want to bring this in too far because I'm going to be putting some of that lilac on the outside, and I don't want the two to meet. That's how we're going to avoid those shadows canceling each other out. And then what we will do is we will use another shade that's in here in order to bridge the gap. When I first started filming on YouTube, I remember talking to somebody about the various ways that we like to test out new makeup. And she was telling me how she likes to just kind of take a new palette on just like a little stroll, like do an everyday look with it. And me, I like to take a new palette to the track and see what its top speed is. So that's what we're doing today, obviously. We are seeing what the top speed of this palette is. How dramatic can we go? Looking at this palette though, I do think that this palette's gonna have a lot of versatility in that regard. I can definitely see a fair number of very dramatic looks, but I also think we have a lot of really soft, pretty, everyday looks in here as well. I really, really enjoy that. I really like when a palette has a high variability in the level of intensity that it can offer. Okay, so I'm happy for the most part with the green. And then I want to start bringing some of that lilac into the inside corner. So I'm going to take another pretty small fluffy brush. This is a 13 from Rephr. And I'm going to go ahead and go into Twilight Lilac here. And I'm just going to put that through the inside socket. Again, trying not to overlap with that green we already have going on. We're going to end up leaving a gap that we will bridge with a third color. Okay, I did actually end up overlapping a tiny bit of the green and the purple there, and you can kind of see where it's starting to gray out, where those two shadows meet there in the crease. And that's just because I brought the green in a little further than I should have, but it's okay. I don't think that's going to damage the eye look. That whole kind of graying out effect that you get when you mix two complementary colors can be used for certain effects if you do it on purpose, but it can be frustrating when you do it accidentally, especially because it's really difficult. It's really hard to come back from that. It's really hard to put saturation back into the eye look once it starts to gray out like that. And there's just a tiny bit of overlap there. I think we're going to be okay. So there have been a lot of theories about why these baked shades are no longer showing up in Pat McGrath's palettes, and I kind of wanted to talk about those a little bit. I'm going to actually take this shade here and go over that inside corner just to bring some light into the inside corner. So one of the theories that I have heard is that whatever manufacturer is creating this particular formula is no longer creating it, or that some ingredient in this formula has been banned in Europe. And I do not think that this is a credible rumor for a few reasons. First of all, Pat McGrath is still producing her earlier palettes. They're still available. She's producing and distributing them with those baked shades. So obviously they're still being manufactured. Second, Pat McGrath is not the only brand to be producing shades like this. Bobbi Brown is currently creating a pretty good formula dupe for the Blitz Astral shades, although in some pretty, in my opinion, pretty boring and uninspiring colors. But she is distributing shadows with this specific type of formula. And there is a company called Wycon out of Italy who is also producing eyeshadows that are a formula dupe for the Blitz Astral shades in some more interesting colors. That might be something to check out if you're really missing that particular formula. So I think the claim that there's an availability problem probably is not accurate. The other possibility that I have heard is that this is just a cost-cutting measure. And I think this is a little bit more of a credible theory, simply because we have kind of watched Pat McGrath. Listen, I stan Pat McGrath. We all know this. You have seen any of my eyeshadow inventory videos and seen how many palettes of hers that I own. We all know this, right? Okay, so I'm not an unbiased perspective here. However, I can admit that I do feel like Pat McGrath as a brand has been functioning like a brand that is trying to, I want to say, squeeze every possible penny out of every single release, and has been making some very financially motivated decisions. Now, obviously, every company, their decisions are ultimately going to be financially motivated because that's their businesses. That's kind of what they do. But in the case of Pat McGrath Labs, I'm just bringing a little bit more of that Twilight Lilac back into the crease here. I do feel like in the case of Pat McGrath, I feel like some of those choices have been so overt, like the reduction in the quality of packaging, the re-releasing of old products as new products, the liquidation of inventory into discount outlets like TJ Maxx and Marshalls, the weird collabs with mobile games. Those kind of moves I really feel like have damaged the brand, to be perfectly honest, because they feel like money grabs is what they feel like. And that's not something, that's never how you want to feel when you're purchasing what is essentially a luxury product. And nobody wants to feel like they're being sold a luxury product where corners have been cut and pennies have been pinched. That is not a luxury experience. So I do feel like some of those moves that the brand has made over the last several years have been damaging to the brand. I'm liking how that's looking. So if you can see, I have left a gap there in the middle, kind of like we're doing a halo eye, except for I don't have a ton of darkness in that inside corner. You totally could go with that approach. I don't find it super flattering on my eye shape though. So what we're going to do is we're going to find another color in this palette here to bridge that gap. I think we're going to go with this one here, and we're going to put that in the center to bridge the gap between those two colors. And the reason why I'm picking this one is because if you were to see these two colors on the color wheel, they're not going to be directly opposed from each other, but they're going to be pretty close. This one is going to be much more toward the middle between both of those shades. So it's going to help with that transition without creating any of that gray muddiness that we would have if we tried to blend these colors directly together. I probably should have used a little bit of a sticky base underneath Astral Iridescent Iris, which is the light shade I put on the inside there. But I don't really see, I'm not seeing a ton of fallout. I don't want to tempt fate though, so I'm going to get something to put in the center of the eye here. So this is my Pat McGrath's Intensify Artistry Wand. It's just this kind of clear gel product. It's not as goopy as a glitter glue, but it has enough tack to it. I feel like it's pretty good at adhering some of her chunkier formulas to the skin. And I'm just gonna lay that down right there in the middle. So the theory that the omission of the baked shades is a cost-cutting measure does ring a little bit more true to me. I could see that being the case. Although I'm curious how effective it is as a cost-cutting measure if it's requiring the development of new formulas, as I feel like is what's happening with these new Astral special shades of hers. In my opinion, this is a completely new formula. I don't think it's in any of her other motherships. I don't think it's in any of the Quints. It's a completely different formula. I'm just going to pick this up on my finger. I definitely think you could do this with a brush, but I'm going to pick it up on a finger and I'm just going to dab it at the center of the eye. Now there is definitely a fair amount of reflectivity in this shadow, but the value of it, I don't feel like it's not quite as bright as I want it to be. It's doing a good job of bridging those two colors though, without anything going gray. I want it to be lighter though. So I think I'm going to go in with this shade here. This is Divine Dawn. This is quite possibly the most dupeable shade in this palette. I think she includes a shadow like this in almost every single one of her palettes. I don't have another clean rough or flat brush, so I'm just going to go in with this one from Laura Mercier. I'm just going to lay that on top right in the center, just to bring a little bit more light to the center of the lid. Actually, at this point, I think I'm just going to go in with my finger to see if I can get a little more oomph out of this shade. There's not a whole lot of shine in this shade. It's just, I mean, it does have some shine, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have a whole lot of sparkle as compared to the special shades in here. It's just the lightest shade in the palette. And it still has that kind of neutral undertone that's going to help us bridge these two colorful shades. So, the third theory that I've heard that I honestly think is the most compelling that I have heard so far is I've heard a lot of hearsay that Sephora specifically has discouraged Pat McGrath Labs from continuing to distribute the baked Blitz Astral shades in their palettes. And while that kind of sounds a little strange, Sephora is a big enough deal for the brands that are distributed through them. I don't think that any brand could really easily ignore any guidance from that retailer. So if Sephora felt that that particular formula was creating like a negative customer experience for their customers, I think it's entirely feasible that they might lean on Pat McGrath Labs a little bit to omit that formula from their palettes. And there might be a couple of reasons for that. They are very fragile shades and they're hard to ship. Sephora is not known for being enormously gentle with the shipment of their products. And so if you actually go into the reviews on the Sephora site for some of Pat McGrath's older mothership palettes that include these astral shades, there are multiple reports of these astral shades coming broken and that being a really negative experience for the customer. Now, something that kind of surprised me a little bit was that there seemed to be a lot of people who were buying these palettes who specifically disliked these baked Blitz Astral shades. They found them dry, scratchy, kind of gritty. I saw a lot of reviews of people complaining about the lack of pigmentation, which I get, although that's not what the Blitz Astral shades have ever been trying to do, is deliver an enormous amount of pigment. They're very much accent or topper shades. A lot of them have a completely transparent base. I'm not saying that the customers are wrong. You can like a shadow or not like a shadow, but I also do feel like the beauty community, especially here online for the last 10, 12 years, has kind of conditioned us, not just us as makeup enthusiasts, but casual makeup consumers as well, to judge the quality of an eyeshadow based on how pigmented it is, like one swipe full opacity, which is not always the goal with every eyeshadow, and also the creaminess of the consistency, which also is not always the goal for every formula. I have come across certain formulas, like in the indie realm, for instance, that are so creamy they're not wearable, because it's really, really difficult to get them to wear for any length of time without an enormous amount of creasing, because there's just too much emollients in it. It's too creamy. When I was going through the reviews, I was a little surprised to see so many people complaining about the consistency and the performance of the Blitz Astral shades in particular. So there's a possibility that this formula just was not a runaway hit with the majority of Sephora's consumers. If it was hurting Pat McGrath's sales through a retailer as large as Sephora, I can absolutely see that factoring into the marketing decision to remove them from the palettes. More than one thing can be true at the same time. It may have been a cost-cutting measure and also an attempt to increase the average customer satisfaction level with these palettes. Now, obviously, if that last theory holds any weight, That's very sad to me because I really feel like that there was a place for that particular type of formula, especially in makeup that is so artistic and creatively driven as Pat McGrath has been in the past. I could talk about this for ages. Okay, really quick, I'm gonna go back into Nocturnal Bloom here, and I think I'm gonna just soften out the top edge of this green outer wing that I have. We could leave it super graphic the way it is. I'm gonna just soften it a little bit. We're just playing here. We are just experimenting. Then I want to go ahead and take some of this same shadow. I'm gonna take a smaller brush. I've got a really tiny one around here. Yeah, here it is. The Rephr 23. It's just a tiny, tiny little brush. And I'm going to take some of that Nocturnal Bloom and I'm gonna bring it down onto the lower lash line. Just the outside corner, because I think the rest of the underneath, I want to bring some of this lilac down there because I feel like this is a very green heavy look. So I feel like to balance out the colors here, I'd like to bring some of that purple down onto the lower lash line. In any case, I am sad to see the Blitz Astral shadows go. I think it would be lovely if Pat McGrath would release another quad full of them. There were a couple of quads that she released. One is Ritualistic Rose. I have that one. It's one of the reasons why I'm not so sad that the Blitz Astral shades aren't included in this palette, is because I can always reach into that one or any of my other motherships that also have those Blitz Astral formulas. But I think it would be lovely if she would release more of those quads that are just completely comprised of that special formula. I remember I did see a review for Ritualistic Rose that said, oh my gosh, these are the worst shadows ever. There's no pigmentation at all, which I totally get if you were going into that quad trying to make a single cohesive look rather than using it as a palette of special shades to augment another eyeshadow look. I totally get that response. At the same time, I don't think that was the intent of that palette when it was released. And unfortunately, when you're moving from a more niche place in the marketplace and you're attempting to throw a wider net, the way I think Pat McGrath was when they started distributing through Sephora, in a lot of ways you have to start catering for the lowest common denominator. And I don't mean that as a pejorative for any of the consumers who are unsatisfied with Pat McGrath's products. It's not. You get to use your makeup whatever way you want to use your makeup, and you get to enjoy what you want to enjoy. But I do feel like when Pat McGrath sort of cast that wider net, they stopped catering specifically towards the people who were attracted to the highly creative, artistic angle that Pat McGrath had on the marketplace. And they started catering towards people who want it to work in the way that they expect out of the box and not want to have to treat each product as though it's unique. So I think there was definitely some watering down of the brand that happened when it moved into Sephora. And I think the disappearance of the Blitz Astral shades might be a symptom of that. I think we've seen that in some other brands as well. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about Isamaya and how that brand does feel a little bit neutered. It feels a little bit watered down. I have to admit that the aesthetic of Isamaya was so far from what appeals to me in any way. However, I can recognize the way the original aesthetic of the brand, which was not my cup of tea, does seem to have been very, very mitigated and made more palatable for a broader audience rather than occupying that really specific niche that it was aiming for originally as part of the creator's vision. And in the case of Pat McGrath, for those of us who really appreciated the brand for that original vision, for that sense of creativity and artistry, it can be really kind of devastating to watch the brand go through a mass market transition where it does feel a little bit neutered. Pretty happy with how this is looking so far. I want to bring a little more light into the inside corner by using the Divine Dawn shade here. And then I'm also going to bring some of Twilight Lilac, this purple shade, onto the lower lash line. Okay, back to my Rephr 23. I cleaned that off really quick. Going into Divine Dawn here. I don't want to cover up too much of the purple because I'm trying to squeeze as much purple into this look as I possibly can, but I do want just a little bit more light on that inside corner. Now, something that I did hear a couple of people say is that they felt like this color story was very kind of jumbled and thrown together and it didn't make a lot of sense to them. And I have to respectfully disagree. I am not a makeup artist, but I am a professional artist. I am an illustrator. I paint book covers. And there are certain things, there are some universals about how we perceive light and color as humans that are universal across all disciplines of visual art. And it was obvious to me, looking at this color story, that an artist put this together. Just the shades that were selected, the undertones that were included in here, and the neutral colors that were chosen to pair with these more colorful shadows. To me, it was very clear that someone thoughtfully chose these colors, and they did so with a very artistic eye. And that is my professional artist opinion. So I think it's probably likely that Pat herself had some say in the selection of these colors. I don't know how involved she is with the brand. I do think it makes a lot of sense to find out that Pat McGrath has been working with Louis Vuitton on their upcoming beauty line since 2019. They've been working on the release of this new beauty line, because I do think that several of the releases in that window have felt a little bit devoid of kind of that artistic touch that she very much brings to the brand. And again, I think some of that might also be the effects of them broadening their market through Sephora and Ulta sales. I'm going back to my Rephr 13, this little fluffy brush, going back into Twilight Lilac here, and I'm going to take that underneath the lash line. I'm going to go ahead and allow this to overlap with the green that I put under there, because I brought the green down not necessarily for the vibrancy, but I was looking for the depth that we only have in that Twilight. It's the darkest matte that we have in the palette. The depth is really what I was shooting for, so if it grays out a little bit, I'm not going to be terribly bothered by that. Then I'm actually going to dip back into Astral Iridescent Iris, this 5th special shade that we ended up with. And I do think it's a pretty special shade. After swatching everything out, I do feel like this shade here comes the closest to mimicking the effect of the baked astral shades. It's definitely not the same formula, and I prefer the baked formula over this formula, but I do think the effect that it gives comes pretty close. It's got that transparent base that a lot of those Bliss Astral shades had, a lot of very fine dispersed glitter. And again, I'm not getting nearly as much fallout as I expected to. Okay, I want to put some colored liner in my waterline, but I do not have a green that I feel like will suit this particular look. So I'm gonna do something that I do not recommend that you do if you are a contact lens wearer. I have had LASIK, but I used to be a contact lens wearer, and when I wore contacts, there's just no way I would have been able to even consider this. So I'm going in with that 23, that tiny little brush, back into Nocturnal Bloom, the dark green, and I'm just going to tap this on the outside half of my lower waterline in place of a colored liner. Proceed with caution, especially if you have particularly sensitive eyes. You will cry off all of your makeup. Okay, I'm only bringing that in halfway because the inside half of the waterline, I want to put some purple in there. And I have the perfect pencil for that. This is the LA Girl Pastel Dreams Auto Eyeliner in the shade, let's see, where is it? Lavender. If you are into colored liner and you have not tried LA Girl, do not sleep on this. This is quite possibly the best colored liner for the waterline that I have ever found in my life. And it's LA Girl, so it is so affordable. Okay, I think that is it for the eye look. I'm actually pretty happy with how that's turned out. We managed to avoid overlapping too much of the purple and green. I have base on right now, but I have not added anything on top of the base, just in case I needed to fix any fallout. And there is a tiny bit here, mostly from that dark green color, but not nearly as much as I might have expected, especially since I applied that iridescent iris without any base on the inside half of my lid. So that's pretty impressive. I'm gonna go ahead and finish the rest of my makeup. We'll have a little chat about the palette, and then we're gonna do some comparison swatches. I'm gonna get out my entire Pat McGrath collection. We're going to do some swatchy and see what comparable shades I can find to the ones in this new palette in the rest of my collection. Okay, you guys, that is the final look. I am so happy with how this turned out. I went ahead and put a little bit of liquid liner on the top waterline, and then I added a few little lashes just to the outside corners because I didn't want to cover up all this deliciousness that we just created. I am so pleased with this. I had no issues with any of the formulas. Nothing was too chunky or difficult to blend. Even that very dark green shade, which I think is the shade that is kind of the scariest. The really deep mattes can be a little tricky to blend, but this one, I feel like this one blended really beautifully. To be honest, this is pretty much exactly what I was hoping for when I first saw this color story. For context, I am 8.5 months pregnant. There is not a whole lot in this world that can make me feel particularly fierce right now. We're at the stage where like it's difficult for me to roll over in bed. So yeah, not feeling super fierce. This makes me feel fierce. You know what I'm saying? Super pleased with how this look turned out. Now, obviously this is a very full on look, and I definitely think this palette is capable of doing some softer, more everyday looks. So what I probably am going to end up doing is filming some shorts with me applying more everyday looks and maybe a couple more dramatic looks. I might do an all green look or a look that leans more in the lilac direction. And I'll use those shorts to just kind of explore the range of this palette. And I might have some more thoughts for you a little bit later on that I can catch you up on. What I would like to do is go over some comparison swatches for you. I have all of my Pat McGrath makeup palettes here. We're just going to go through each color in the Petalmorphosis palette and see what we can find in the rest of my collection that is similar. So you can maybe make a decision on whether or not it makes sense to bring this into your collection. I personally am really pleased to have this palette. I think it's the first color story I've seen from Pat McGrath in a while that just really strikes that balance for me of something that I find wearable for me, but also provides me with that kind of artistic outlet. I'm really pleased with the mattes. I'm pleased with the new formula of shimmers, even if they aren't Bliss Astral shades. So obviously the big question is it worth the money? And that I find, that's the question. I find that one impossible to answer, just because it depends so much on you, your financial situation, what you're hoping to get out of the makeup, how you enjoy makeup. And that's a very individual question. For me, was it worth $128? I almost certainly would have waited for a sale. Was it worth it to my husband, who got to see me so delighted to pull it out of the gift bag? I think it probably was. I think it was probably worth it to him. Am I really happy to have received it and to have it in my collection? Yes, I am. I think I'm going to get an enormous amount of enjoyment out of this palette. Is it the perfect palette? No. I wish it had a little bit more purple in it. I think I could have omitted either one of these shades here and put a little bit more purple in, and that would have been a more perfect palette for me specifically. But it is definitely a palette I'm going to be enjoying very much. So let's take a look at some of the comparison swatches. Okay, I have pretty much my entire Pat McGrath collection here so that we can look at some comparisons. I'm just going to go across the top and then we'll do the bottom row, and we're just going to see what we can find that's similar to what is in the Petalmorphosis palette. We're going to start here with Divine Dawn, which I think is probably going to be the easiest shade to find comparisons to in the rest of my collection. I'm going to start first with the Mothership palettes because I feel like these are the palettes that she tends to put these types of shades in the most often. So this one is Mothership 11. This is Sunlit Seduction. This was her last Mothership release. And this is the shadow that I think is most comparable to Divine Dawn. Then we have Mothership 6, Midnight Sun. We have another very similar shade in the same position in the palette. The last Mothership I have here is Mothership 10, Moonlit Seduction, probably my favorite Mothership. Okay, we're going to see if there's anything comparable in the quads. This is the Venus in Fleurs Luxe Quad in Voyeuristic Vixen. This is the quad in Passion Fleur. Maybe the only one that's as pinky. Oh, it's got a little bit more pink in it. I'm putting it right next to the one from Petalmorphosis, which to this point has had the most pink in it of all of these shades, but this one has even more pink in it. Okay, taking a look at my quints. This is Bronze Blitz. And this one might bear some resemblance. The formula of this is definitely different. This one here, definitely not the same formula on that one. A lot more reflectivity on that one. This is Lunar Nightshade from the Bijou Brilliance collection. This one feels like a similar formula. Just for fun, we're going to swatch this one, but I think that the formula for this one, the center shade, is going to be a lot closer to this one. A lot of pink in that one too, and much more reflective than these other shadows. Last quint is Nude Allure. Ooh, I almost feel like that's a dead-on dupe. We're going to re-swatch these two to see how close they actually are. So this is from Petalmorphosis, and this one is from Nude Allure. Okay, they are not identical, but they are so close. Okay, we've got a shadow in this one that might be similar. This is one of the Bridgerton. This is Belle of the Ball from the Bridgerton collection. This is Iconic Infatuation. It's the Valentine's Day collection from a couple of years ago. So again, this one and this one, these are both from Petalmorphosis. Last one, this is Celestial Nirvana, which was a holiday release from a couple of years ago. I don't think this one's going to give us anything new. And these are all of the similar and somewhat similar shades I have to Divine Dawn in my Pat McGrath collection. The next one that we're going to take a look at is Twilight Lilac. First one that I think has some similarities is, I think this one is probably the closest in this palette. Definitely a grayer tone, that one. I think this one from the Passion Fleur Quad is going to be quite a bit deeper. Yeah, quite a lot deeper, but it does have a similar amount of coolness to this one. Next, this is Moonlit Seduction. We've got this shade here. I don't actually have the card with the names of the shades for these other motherships on me right now, so I'll put the names of them on the screen. Well, these two are pretty similar. This one's obviously a little warmer. These ones from Iconic Infatuation I think are too warm. Maybe that one. She's pretty deep too, but I'm going to go ahead and swatch her just for fun. This is from Belle of the Ball. These two are so close. On camera, I feel like there's a lot more brown showing through on this one, but in person, they are almost identical. Neither one of them is quite like Twilight Lilac though. Let's try swatching this one in Lunar Nightshade. This one is not as matte as the other shades are. You can see there's a little bit more reflectivity in that shadow. Almost like a slightly blue shift, but yeah, much deeper. Okay, for the last one for us to look at is this shade here in Celestial Nirvana, which I think you can already tell is not going to be a match. Much more saturated. And just for fun, I'm also going to swatch this one. I know this is not going to be a match, but I kind of want to just get all of my purples up here. Sorry, I swatched out of frame there. These are all my Pat McGrath purples, or purple adjacent colors. Again, this is Twilight Lilac from Petalmorphosis. The next one we're going to look at is Cosmic Fantasies. Here is one of the Blitz Astral shades from Ritualistic Rose. This is a quad that is all it has is big shades. Quite a bit more luminosity. This is Forbidden Fruit from Eternal Eden. A lot less base on this one. Much drier shadow, but it is not one of the baked formulas. This is the Nude Allure palette. And the fourth shadow here. This Quint formula is much softer and more buttery than any of these other shadows. Not quite. Almost the right depth, but not quite as blackened as Cosmic Fantasies. I don't think that this is going to be a match, but I'm curious anyway. Not nearly enough purple in that one. Might be a better match for the bronze shade in Petalmorphosis. This is Sunlit Seduction. I'm going to try swatching this one here. Ooh, I think that might be the closest one yet. Yeah, that one is the closest one so far. It is more reflective though. Definitely more of that lighter colored shimmer going through that one. And yeah, those are all of the comparable shades to Cosmic Fantasies, which is this one here, in my collection from Pat McGrath. This next one is Astral Eden Envy, and I think it's the one I'm the most curious about because I really feel like this is the formula that they're trying to use to replace the Blitz Astral baked shades. That is Astral Eden Envy. We have this green here. I don't think it's going to have nearly the amount of reflectivity that Astral Eden Envy has. I don't think this is going to be a match. I'm curious to see this one from Belle of the Ball alongside the others. This is one of her baked shades. Obviously much warmer. Then we have this one from Sith Seduction. I think it has a lot of that same blackened base, but I don't know if it's as olive. Now these two are very similar, but neither one has the same golden olive shimmer. There's a couple of greens here in Starstruck Splendor I want to check on. This one is more of a celery shade, but we might have a little more luck with this one here, which is the shade Emerald. More of a transparent base on that one for sure. And those are all of the comparable green shades to Astral Eden Envy, which is this one here that I have in my Pat McGrath collection. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is this one. This is Astral Sunset Splendor. It's a very warm, peachy bronze shade with a pretty transparent base. I'm just trying to get the camera to focus. There we go. Okay, this shade from Sunlit Seduction is one of her more grippier metallics, so I don't think the finish is going to be similar. But the shade is not terribly far off. I also want to compare it to this Blitz Astral in Midnight Sun, although I think this is a lot more copper. This is the baked formula. Definitely more orange than the peachy tone we have in Astral Sunset Splendor here. I'm going to go ahead and swatch this one in the middle from Nude Allure. That is pretty close. The base is not nearly as transparent, but that is very, very similar. I'm going to go ahead and swatch this duochrome from the Voyeuristic Vixen, although these are not going to be matches. I'm just curious. This has a metal pan in it. It's very chunky, but it is not a baked shade. However, it behaves an awful lot like a baked shade. I'm curious why this formula hasn't gone to replace the baked shades, because I feel like this formula here is a lot closer to the baked shades in terms of how they behave. I'm going to cut that swatch back down to size. Okay, I think the only one that's going to be similar in tone is going to be this orange shade here. But like this one, I think it's just going to end up being a little bit more orange than peach. And obviously much stronger, denser metallic pigmentation. I can't remember if I swatched this one already. Forgive me if I'm swatching this one twice. So this is on Iconic Infatuation. So these are all of the shadows in my collection from Pat McGrath that are similar to Astral Sunset Splendor. We are on to the second row. We're going to be looking at Nocturnal Bloom, which is this dark green matte. And I think this is going to go pretty quick because I'm pretty sure I only have one other shadow in my entire collection that I kind of feel like is worth comparing to this one. This is not a common type of shade for Pat McGrath. So I think we're only going to be swatching it next to one other thing. But this is Nocturnal Bloom. On camera, I feel like I've noticed this in other people's videos as well. I kind of feel like this comes off as a little bit more blackened than it really is in real life. In real life, this is a deep forest green. I don't know if that's completely coming across on camera. The only shadow I think I have to compare that to is this one in Celestial Nirvana, which I know already is not going to be a match, but it's the closest thing I've got. There is definitely more blue in this green from Celestial Nirvana, and it's also quite a bit more vibrant. So that is the only comparable shade that I have in my collection for Nocturnal Bloom from Petalmorphosis. Likewise, I think I only have a couple of things to compare this one to. This is Astral Iridescent Iris. This is a unique shade just because of the nature of the reflect in it and because the base is so transparent. So again, I feel like there's only a couple of other things in my collection that are really worth comparing against this one. So the ones I want to compare that to are this Blitz Astral shade from Moonlit Seduction. This doesn't have the flip that Astral Iridescent Iris has, but it does have that reflectivity and that completely transparent base. And I also want to compare it to this shade here in Celestial Nirvana. This is a completely different formula, and the base is going to be nowhere near as transparent. I wanted to compare it anyway, because this one can be sheared out. It's just not nearly as reflective. And then one more from Starstruck Splendor. This one here. I'm pretty sure the flip on this one is quite a bit more green, but it does also have that more transparent base. This is more of a pink to green, where this is a silver to purple. Those are the comparisons that I have in my collection for Astral Iridescent Iris from the Petalmorphosis palette. Now the next one we're going to be looking at is Lunar Nectar from the Petalmorphosis palette. Now this shadow, as far as I'm aware, is unique in Pat's lineup because it is a sequin shade. It is a matte shadow with golden sparkles in it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe she's ever done a sequin shade like this before. So in attempting to compare some other shadows to this, I'm really going to only be focusing the tone of the underlying matte. And honestly, looking at this shadow, I was so sure that this was going to be something I was going to find a zillion dupes for across my collection, because this kind of dusty rosy color just seems very much up Pat's alley. But interestingly enough, as I was going through these other palettes trying to find some comparisons, this shadow actually is a lot less warm and less deep than a lot of her other shadows along these sorts of lines are. So I'm just going to show you the handful of shadows that I found that I feel like are the closest to the shade. Starting with Moonlit Seduction, we have this shade here. I will go ahead and put the shade name up on the screen. Then we have this shadow from Sunlit Seduction, which is about the same value, but is definitely more pink and more saturated than Lunar Nectar. I do think this shadow here is going to be much deeper and much warmer, but we're gonna swatch it anyway. Then from Starstruck Splendor, we have this shadow here, which is definitely less saturated, but is, in my opinion, closer than any of these others. Then we have Iconic Infatuation, the lightest shade from here. So these are the best comparisons I could find in my collection to Lunar Nectar from Petalmorphosis. The next one we're going to look at is Blitz Radiant Rhapsody, which is this one here. I don't think I have any fair comparisons to this one. I'm going to swatch a few other greens next to it, mostly just for fun, not because I think they're going to be in any way similar, but I'm curious how close we can get. So this is Celestial Celadon from Starstruck Splendor. This is Neptunian Orchid from Lunar Nightshade. And then this is Daring Dandy from Belle of the Ball. While these are roughly in the same family of colors, there's nothing even close to Blitz Radiant Rhapsody, at least in my collection. Okay, and the last one that we have to look at is Blitz Bronze Supernova, which is this bronze one here on the end. I actually think we're going to find a fair amount that's similar to this. These formulas are not the same, but in Sunlit Seduction, we have this bronze shade here. For fun, let's try this one too. Let's try this one from Iconic Infatuation. I think this one is too orange as well. I'm wondering if this one from Celestial Nirvana is anywhere close. Actually, those look almost identical. For the sake of completionism, we have Bronze Bliss here. I'm going to swatch both of these two shades here on the end. Definitely warmer. And this has more of a black base. Then we have a bronze here in the Nude Allure Quint, just this one here on the end. And that one's just a lot lighter and warmer. Then we have the Sith Seduction Quint. This shadow has shattered in the past. Just trying to keep it together. I need to put a little bit of alcohol in there to try to bind it back together. A more transparent base and some white shimmer in that one. Then in Voyeuristic Vixen, we have this bronze here. So this is the original. This is Blitz Bronze Supernova. So far, the closest match that we have is this one from Celestial Nirvana. I don't think this one's going to be similar, but I want to try it anyway. Yeah, it's a lot closer to this one, except without the transparent base. And then just for fun, I want to swatch this shadow from Ritualistic Rose. This is one of the baked Blitz Astrals, but it has a lot less sparkle in it than most of the other Blitz Astrals. And yeah, it's deep enough, but it's a lot more on the warm side. Last, I think I want to swatch both of these from Starstruck Splendor. This one has also shattered a little bit in the pan, so I'm trying to be careful. This is the lighter one. So again, this one is Blitz Bronze Supernova. That one is lighter and warmer. That one is deeper and warmer. Those are all of the comparable shades that I have to Blitz Bronze Supernova in my collection from Pat McGrath. Those are all of the comparisons I have for you in my personal Pat McGrath collection. I have to admit, when I was swatching the Divine Dawn and that last shadow, the bronze eyeshadow, I did not realize how many bronze and champagne eyeshadows that I had in my Pat McGrath collection. That was a little sobering. I'm never, ever going to get through that much bronze and champagne eyeshadow in my entire life. In any case, that is it for my first look at this Petalmorphosis palette from Pat McGrath. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!